Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to episode number 43 of the Primetime Rundown interview series powered by StreamYard right here on the Eastern Observer. I'm Ian Schraier, and as we continue our dive tonight into the athletic communications industry, it is my pleasure to welcome the Associate Athletic Director for Strategic Communications at Stony Brook University, Adam Rubin. Adam, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Oh, my pleasure, Ian. I watched last week's episode with Steven Gorchoff, my friend from Hofstra, and even though he's my friend, I learned so much from that episode about him, so I'm looking forward to this.
We certainly look forward to with your experiences, and for our viewers out there, at least for those that don't know, most of us as SIDs, we aspire to reach the pros, to reach the professional sports circuit and break into it. In Adam's case, he has a decade and a half of experience working in the professional sports circuit before coming to the college side, but more on that later. But before we begin, we certainly want to invite our viewers to place a question in the comment box through whatever platform you might be watching tonight's interview. And we would certainly like to try to get to those questions at some point during tonight's discussion. So please be sure to drop a question into the comment box and we will certainly try and get to it. Adam, first question, we've asked this on all of our interviews, and we certainly want to continue it with you. It's been a very interesting 8 months, to say the least. How have these 8 months been for you?
Well, certainly we're really excited next week to hopefully get the basketball season going. It'll be our first game since March. Thankfully, personally, my family's been healthy, so I'm very thankful for that. And as an athletic communications staff at Stony Brook, we've been fortunate to have been spared a lot of the layoffs or any layoffs or furloughs, which have afflicted a lot of the other people in our industry. So feel very, very fortunate about that as well. And I'm really thankful for our staff. They're performing at such a high level. I look at like our analytics from October, and we're matching the engagements and the impressions we did last October, 2019, when we had games going, which tells you what a good job they're doing. I guess the one sad thing that I ought to mention is one of my friends, Anthony Causey, who a lot of people know in the New York area as being the sports photographer for the New York Post, passed away from COVID several months ago, and I really feel for his family. Anthony was such a good friend to so many people in the industry. You see all the teams in the New York area responding and honoring him, and rightfully so. He taught me sports photography, which is my passion now, because he would come down to spring training all those years with the Mets for the New York Post, and I was at the Daily News and then ESPN, and we really got to be close, and he was so helpful to me. In fact, he took the Stony Brook men's lacrosse photos, like a photo day, like a Met-style photo day he did for our men's lacrosse team in March. And he wouldn't even take anything for it, even though he laid out money even for like the white backdrop, which just shows you how generous he is. So as fortunate as we are at Stony Brook and my family personally, I'm still very sad for his family. And he was just an amazing person.
Yeah, our deepest condolences. I remember when the news broke that we had lost Anthony Causey to COVID-19, and it was great to see the devotion that the Mets and the Yankees, both local baseball clubs, did for him to basically put, at least in the Mets case, to put a cutout at his old spot. For you, Adam, have you been working virtually? Have you been on campus? Has there been a combination of the two? And also, have you found yourself to be more or less busy as a result of the pandemic?
Well, we've been back in person at least part-time since August, and now the staff is here full-time with basketball season games hopefully starting next week. And we've as far as workload, we were pretty. I guess we'll get into it at some point, but a lot of the approach we've taken is kind of a journalism approach. Having been in the pros, I would analogize it to maybe like Mets.com, where we're creating a lot of in-house content about our own teams. And that's been the case even without games. Certainly it's been more challenging without games going on since March, but we've been doing a ton of feature stories, profiles of alumni, really delving into our student athletes stories, and it's paid dividends. As I mentioned, our website traffic really is dipped only marginally, and our social media engagements have matched or exceeded what we did even with games going on a year ago. So I think our staff has really performed at a high level and been busy, even though there hasn't been a game for 8 months.
Yeah, I think we all miss the home games, and we're kind of ready to get back to the game day grind, so to speak. But it's incredible, the ideas and the content that we're all trying to come up with at this point. And we're seeing a lot of furloughs, a lot of layoffs as a result of the economic hardships that we're all suffering as a result of the pandemic. So that's great that at Stony Brook you guys are finding ways to keep the content rolling, whether it be through alumni, player profiles. At Adelphi, we've been doing the exact same thing. So it's great to see other schools doing the same.
Yeah, no. I mean, just an example, our two stories we did recently that were really well received video-wise. One of our men's lacrosse players, our face-off person, is also a boat tender at a nearby marina, where he basically takes people to their boats and stuff. So we tagged along with him for a day and did a profile of him. One of our swimmers, Jessica Salmon, is studying marine biology. So we went out on a marine research vessel from our School of Marine Science with her and did a package on that. So we're finding the angles to do and really taking a journalism type approach to what we do. And I know a lot of schools are doing that now, but it's really helped serve us where we don't have the game stories and advances and things like that to turn out. Sure.
Let's backtrack now. Let's start off with the beginning of the Adam Rubin story. You were born in the Bronx, and you were raised on Long Island, a few towns west of me right now, actually in Belmore. Can you describe what your childhood was like for our viewers, as well as what really grew your love of sports as a child?
Sure. Well, I'm about to date myself in terms of age, so you're gonna if the gray hair didn't give it away on the sides, you're about to find out how old I am. But I moved to Long Island, to Belmore, entering the third grade, which coincided with the Islanders winning the first of their 4 Stanley Cups. So it tells you how old I am. But when the Islanders win Stanley Cups when you're 6, 7, 8, and 9 years old, you kind of get hooked by sports, and you kind of get hooked by the Islanders and hockey particularly. So, I mean, to this day, even though I covered baseball for 15 years, hockey is my first love and the sport I really care about the most. I actually, I don't know if I ever mentioned it to you, but I actually part owner of a minor league hockey team in Birmingham, Alabama, which is the team I covered in the 1990s when they were East Coast Hockey League team in the 90s in Birmingham. So it's a thrill to be involved with the Birmingham Bulls now, and still when things before pre-COVID, I was still playing deck hockey out in Farmingdale, and right before that, inline hockey in Old Bethpage as well.
I was gonna say I never knew that about you. I find that so interesting that hockey's actually your first love when you did a decade and a half working on the professional sports beat in baseball. I have to ask, I mean, is your favorite hockey moment the Bobby Nystrom goal? What's your favorite Islander moment then?
Oh, you know what though? I was so young then. Those are the teams that I recall them winning, but the vivid memories are more kind of like the Pat LaFontaine era and then the Pierre Turgeon era. So sure. My jersey. My jersey was always 77. I still wear 77 to this day for Pierre Turgeon. And my brother used to have a 33 Benoit Hogue jersey. If I don't even remember these names anymore, but yeah, that was quite a while ago.
So from Long Island, you went down to the local Philadelphia area. You started school. You went to college at the University of Pennsylvania. You earned your bachelor's degree from there in economics in 1995. Doesn't seem like a route that would really take you down the professional sports aisle, so to speak, that you majored and graduated with a degree in economics. So before you attended Penn, or I should say as you attended Penn and decided to major in economics, what was really your long-term career plan with a major in economics?
Well, when I go speak to journalism classes now and I tell them, you don't need a journalism degree to go into journalism, the professors cringe. So I try to say it very, very nicely, but when I went to, I was always, even though I got kind of drafted to do, this is really, really old, but I got drafted to do my high school yearbook. I was always more mathematically inclined in high school and things like that. So it made sense to go the business route and got into Wharton and decided to attend Wharton. But even before I got to Penn's campus, late in my senior year, that summer, entering college, the Daily Pennsylvanian, the student newspaper at Penn, sent a new student edition home with an ad about how to join the sports staff. And I joined the club baseball team when I got to Penn, but I also joined the student newspaper. And I realized time-wise with Wharton, I couldn't do both. So I had to make a quick decision about whether to go kind of the cover sports or to try to play club baseball, and probably not very well. So I went the sports journalism route and got hooked by it so quickly that even though I proceeded to complete the degree at Wharton in economics, which actually served me well even to this day, even like when I was covering the Mets with doing stories about the Wilpons and the Madoff affair, just having that Wharton foundation always helped, even though I went into journalism.
Well, my next question was going to lead into the fact that you wrote for the Daily Pennsylvanian. When you got that opportunity to write for them, did you initially go, work into sports, or were there other areas of the university that you were covering it initially?
No, I was always exclusively a sports reporter at Penn, at the Daily Pennsylvanian, but I was pretty serious. So we did our share of media investigative stories. I still remember the time the Penn sports teams were really successful, and a lot of the other schools in the league were jealous, and they started writing columns about how Penn was dipping admission standards to let in certain athletes. So I actually was an investigative reporter even back then, and was able to get the Ivy League uses something called an academic index to decide what schools could let in what student athletes at what rate and things like that. So someone leaked me those numbers, and I kind of demonstrated how Penn was playing within the rules and things like that. So even back in the day, I was kind of an investigative reporter. I still remember. I don't know if the sign is still hanging on the Daily Pennsylvanian wall, but Steve Bilski was hired as Penn athletic director all the way back in like 1993 or 94, I want to say, and we actually at 30th Street Station, the night before the press conference, we actually was there. We sent a reporter and a photographer to 30th Street Station in Philadelphia, which is the equivalent of Penn Station in Philadelphia. And as he's coming up the escalator from the Amtrak train, we're snapping photos of him before the press conference, and had an interview with him the night before the press conference. So we were serious journalists back then.
You had mentioned about the fact before actually we jumped on the interview tonight, you had kind of had a short discussion with me about the history of Penn sports and how the pedigree of Penn sports, especially in the Ivy League in football and basketball. And while you were there, the men's basketball team under the now acting athletic director at Temple and historic head men's basketball coach at Temple and first at Penn, Fran Dunphy, won 3 straight Ivy League championships while you were there. The last time they won an NCAA tournament game, you were a student at Penn. What was it like? And I'm specifically asking more about men's basketball here. What was it like covering those games at the Palestra and having the opportunity to see such a successful program?
The Palestra is an unbelievable place. If you've never gone to a basketball game, once everything subsides, I would really encourage you to go there. When I wasn't covering the games, I had front row, first seat at midcourt seats where you can literally stick your foot out and trip the referee. You're so close to the court. Basically, I still remember the basketball team had Matt Maloney and Jerome Allen on it, both of whom played in the NBA. Jerome Allen now, he obviously got in a little trouble recently, but he's I think an assistant coach with the Boston Celtics now. Literally, they lost the final Ivy weekend of my freshman year at Columbia. Then the rest of the time I was there, they proceeded to win 43 straight Ivy League games. 14-0, 14-0, 14-0, 3 straight years. Couple that with the football team at the same time with Mark DeRosa, the former Atlanta Brave, Chicago Cub, as the quarterback. He was on the baseball team, but also was on the football team as the quarterback. They won 21 straight games when I was there at the time, and went on to set what was the 1AA record at the time for most consecutive wins. So it was an amazing time to be at Penn. And the great thing about that NCAA tournament win in '94, I was actually there at the game. It was at Nassau Coliseum on Long Island. And if you know anything about the University of Pennsylvania and where it draws the students from, it's basically, I'm sure they try to keep as many Long Islanders out of there as they can. But it was a 1994 Penn basketball game at Nassau Coliseum was essentially a home game. And you had Nebraska coming with Eric Piatkowski was the star player on the team, all the way from Nebraska to play Penn and Nassau Coliseum. And we put a number, we did a number on him that day. And then the next round lost to Florida the year they went to the Final Four with Dimitri Hill and Andrew DeClercq. And then a senior year with Jerome Allen and Matt Maloney took it was in Baltimore, the NCAA tournament game, and took Alabama to overtime with Antonio McDyess on that team, put a real scare in them that day, and unfortunately lost in the first round. And I still remember the Daily Pennsylvanian headline the next day was "Now it's over," because that was an amazing class. It wasn't just Jerome Allen and Matt Maloney. It was guys like Eric Moore was on that team, Sean Trice, just tremendous. Ira Bowman was a transfer from Providence who was on that team as well. It was just a amazing team, and I think other than Ira Bowman, they all graduated after that. We went to Michigan that year, and my senior year, and when they were seniors, and beat what was left of the Fab Five that year at Michigan. For an Ivy League school to do that at the time, it was. I know Harvard and some other schools are really ascended now, but back then that was a huge statement.
And what a history that was developed under, as you had mentioned, under Fran Dunphy in his time as the head men's basketball coach at Penn, where he really got his start and developed the eventual Hall of Fame career that he has. It doesn't have to be basketball related, Adam, but do you have a favorite sports moment in your time covering Penn athletics for the Daily Pennsylvanian?
It's actually football related. Even and actually, it's funny. The coach here, the head football coach here at Stony Brook, Chuck Priori, was on the staff with Al Bagnoli. I think he was the offensive coordinator at the time at Penn when I was there, and he says he remembers me as the sports editor there. I don't really believe him, but he's humoring me and says he remembers me. But it was such a tremendous time. But the game I remember was 1993. And at the time, Penn and Princeton were both undefeated in football going into, I think, what was the last game of the season. And Keith Elias was getting an unbelievable amount of publicity that game. Sports Illustrated did a feature on him going into that game, I think. And he ended up with only 59 yards that game. And our running back, Terrence Stokes, I think, had 272 yards that game. And we won the Ivy League title. And there were actually, even though Ivy League football attendance is usually pretty modest. Franklin Field holds about 60,000, but always had modest attendances. That game, there were over 30,000 people at that game. And Franklin Field, like the Palestra, is an incredibly historic venue. So it was just really, really an amazing time to be at Penn. Not all the sports teams were strong, but the men's basketball team and the football team were exceptionally strong. And we were juggernauts. I say we, I was a reporter for the Daily Pennsylvania, a student there, but we were juggernauts in the Ivy League in those two sports in that period.
Did you actually? I was going to ask to kind of build off of the football history in the Ivy League. Did you also have any opportunities to cover games at the Yale Bowl? I've never been, but I'm curious to get your opinion on.
You know, I want to say I did, because the way the football schedules worked, where it was basically home every other year, and basketball. I know I've been to Payne Whitney Gymnasium at Yale. I think they may have refurbished it since then, but in the 90s, it was kind of like a cathedral kind of look to it, because and that was one of the great things about working at the Daily Pennsylvania. It was almost like a fraternity in a way. We would all basically pack up, rent a couple of vans, and just go to wherever the road games were. And they had, the Ivy League played, at least at the time, I don't know if they still do, Friday, Saturday. I think they still do Friday, Saturday road games. So basically, and there were travel partners. So one weekend we would go to Brown, Yale. Another weekend we would go to Harvard, Dartmouth. Another weekend we go to Cornell, Columbia. And we always would stay with whatever. There was always inevitably some family from the Daily Pennsylvania whose parents lived there. So we would go out for a weekend and go to the games, whether we were the ones covering it or not. And it was just a tremendous fraternity experience going to those games.
So your junior year, Adam, let's head to your junior year, where
you better hurry up or else we're not going to get through my life.
Well, I mean, you have a lot of great experiences from college, and we certainly don't want to miss out on talking about any of it. But your junior year at Penn, you study abroad. I should say you study domestically abroad, and you head down to Alabama, and you actually, during the fall semester of your junior year, you take classes at UAB while you're pursuing internships. Your junior year. So you took classes at UAB, which allowed you to graduate on time from Penn. And as a result, the internship that you had led to your first full-time job as a reporter for the Birmingham News. So looking back, I mean, what can you tell us about your experience in that first job writing for the Birmingham News? And was there a mentor during your internship experience that really helped you along the way?
I'm so grateful for that experience at the Birmingham News. And there was an Alabama reporter at the time named Doug Segrist who picked my application out of a pile of resumes at the time for that fall internship of my junior year. And the wonderful, and I'm so thankful, I keep in touch with him to this day. If I had not had that experience in Birmingham, then I don't know if I ever would have ascended to covering the Mets or even really pursued seriously a career in journalism. The wonderful thing about that internship was that even though I was only 19 years old at the time, I believe, fall semester of my junior year, they treated me like a regular staff reporter. So whether it was going out and helping out with a sidebar, an SEC game, Alabama-Auburn game, or even sending me to, because at the time newspapers were healthier, they might send me to the Florida-Tennessee game to cover it as the primary person. So at 19 years old, I'm covering Florida-Tennessee games for the Birmingham News. And the Birmingham News, aside from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, was the dominant paper in that region at the time. Or they'd send me to a smaller college game, like a Samford football game. I would do high school features during the week. I'd cover the minor league hockey team, maybe do a Barron's, the White Sox AA story at the time. So they treated me during that internship like I was a regular reporter there. And when I came back to the Daily Pennsylvanian after that in 1994 to be the sports editor, I was so prepared for that because of that internship.
You kind of skipped off a few pieces here, and that's okay, because I love the fact that you went in depth about your time at the News. you became so well known for your time in the baseball industry, but you just mentioned that you had the opportunity for 5 years to cover SEC football. And if you were there from 95 to 2000 and you're covering Florida, Tennessee games, you're covering Danny Werfel, Peyton Manning. Yeah. So there's certainly something to be said for that. You also had the opportunity to cover the 1996 Olympics in Atlanta as well. What were those? And obviously we know that at the 96 Olympics, there was a terrorist attack at Centennial Park, but what were those experiences like for you, for someone at your age in your early 20s, to have the opportunity, and you already touched upon it with the fact that you were able to cover SEC football, but most, including myself at that age, would die to have an opportunity like that. What was that experience like for you?
Well, just to backtrack 1 second, I interned the fall semester of my junior year at the Birmingham News, and that's the paper that rehired me when I graduated. They didn't have a full-time opportunity, but they really liked me during my internship. So basically, they had a year internship after I graduated, 95 through 96. And again, they treated me like a real reporter. They assigned me to the U.S. men's Olympic soccer team for a year leading up to the Olympics, where I would follow the men's soccer team around the country. I remember they played a friendly or something at Mitchell Field right here in Uniondale, and the Birmingham News, it was a different time economically for newspapers. They sent me home to Long Island to cover the U.S. men's soccer team on Long Island. Then I got to cover them in the Olympics in 96. I still remember, that was probably, there were a handful of moments in my career where I distinctly remember covering a event, and covering that U.S.-Argentina opening round first game in the Olympics was something I'll never forget. U.S. is heavy underdogs to Argentina in that match. Argentina is one of the gold medal favorites. It's at Legion Field in Birmingham, which is where Alabama used to play a lot of its games at the time, including against Tennessee every year. And you have 85,000 people, mostly American fans, packing the stadium, most of whom are more college football fans, don't really know a lot about soccer. Soccer's obviously grown in popularity professionally. At the time, though, it was kind of more of a niche sport, I would say. And Claudio Reyna scores less than in the first minute of that match. And even though the U.S. lost that match 3-1, just the explosion when Claudio Reyna scores 30 seconds into that match or so was just extraordinary. It sent tingles through everybody there. The U.S. ended up beating Tunisia. I remember the next game went 1-1-1 in that group, and didn't advance. I think it was Portugal. They tied Portugal, and Portugal ended up advancing. Actually, Portugal, I think, finished a point ahead of the U.S., but they had a draw between the two teams in that meeting, and just a wonderful experience. And that really, and basically what happened was that I had that year internship in Birmingham, and they like me, but they can't just create a position out of thin air. So they offered me a job on their Metro staff. So for close to a year, I worked on the Metro staff, and I mentioned going to Wharton that I ended up not really practicing business, but it helped me in covering, say, like the Madoff affair. Well, that year on the Metro staff or so in Birmingham has helped me out tremendously too. When there were legal incidents over the years, whether in Port St. Lucie, if people remember back to the Kareem Garcia, Shane Spencer incident all the way back in the day at Big Apple Pizza, or let's say Francisco Rodriguez has the incident at Shea Stadium at the time with the domestic incident at Shea Stadium at the time. I mean, if you're a sports reporter and you haven't been drilled in who to call and those kinds of instances, it's more difficult. Where I had covered court cases, I had covered legal issues in that walk of life, so I knew exactly who to call. I knew what exactly databases to check and things like that. So it was a tremendous foundation I got at the Birmingham News, and I'm forever thankful for the people there for helping me out.
Yeah, going back to what you were saying about about covering the World Cup, 4 years ago, I went to my first World Cup qualifier at Red Bull Arena between the U.S. and Costa Rica. That the U.S. lost 2-0. We certainly know that the U.S. didn't go on to play for the World Cup 4 years ago. We hope that changes in the years to come. But there's no experience, and I'm speaking from my experience, and I know you can as well, Adam, that there's no experience, in my opinion, at least, than going to a World Cup soccer game when you're there cheering on for your country, cheering on for your nation's colors. And I don't think I've ever heard a stadium ever get so loud. So sorry to cut you off. I mentioned there were several moments in my career covering games that stand out, and so many of them are because it transcends sports. Of those moments, so many of them transcend sports. I covered the first game back at Shea Stadium in New York. The first game back after September 11th, when Mike Piazza had that dramatic home run. Again, it was
was about the country in the moment. Also, I was in Philadelphia with the Mets when word started to spread that Osama bin Laden had been killed, and those are the memories. Obviously, there are some pure sporting events that I really remember too, but among my favorites are the ones that transcended sports, and those are three of the examples, purely because of what it meant to the country and just the emotion involved with it.
Well, I know we've been touching on it across our first 25 minutes of this interview, but I think our viewers have been waiting for me to break into the discussion when opportunity came knocking for you in 2000, and the Subway Series between the Mets and the Yankees had just ended, and you get put on the Mets beat with a pretty well-known hometown newspaper, the New York Daily News. Again, a dream job. Can you tell us, I guess, explain how that came to be, to have the opportunity from going from Birmingham to coming home and having the opportunity to work of all newspapers, to work for the Mets beat and to work for the New York Daily News?
Well, to tell you how important connections and networking are, there are so many qualified people who want to get to a New York newspaper, or at that time wanted to get to a New York newspaper to work. And I was incredibly fortunate. There was a columnist at the time at the New York Daily News, Mark Kriegel, who I didn't even know, but we had a mutual friend, and that friend mentioned to him that I was interested in joining the paper. And he read some of my stuff. And Mark, if you know who, if anyone's ever met him, can be incredibly persistent. And I regret that we've lost touch, but he literally lobbied the sports editor for a full year to hire me without even knowing me, just because he liked my stuff. He was that passionate about it, which I really appreciate to this day. And fortunately, the New York Daily News hired me. And you ask how I got on the Mets beat. You would think everyone's clamoring to cover a New York baseball beat. There were 30 sports writers at the Daily News at the time. And I can assure you, when the beat came open, what happened was TJ Quinn was on the Mets beat, now at ESPN as an investigative reporter. And basically, they were taking him off the Mets beat at the Daily News to help form or be part of an investigative sports team at the New York Daily News. So they needed a Mets writer at the time. They looked around the staff, and literally, I'm not exaggerating, no one on the staff wanted to cover the Mets. And it wasn't because the Mets were bad or anything like that. They're only 2 years removed at that point from being in the Subway Series against the Yankees. But if you consider baseball, you're on the road 170 days a year between spring training and the playoffs and everything, and 81 road games. And you're working nights and weekends when you're at home. And then the free agency is incredibly hectic. You know, Scott Boras takes free agents all the way into the next spring training. So there's never, and this is pre-social media era being dominant, where it's even more crazy now. So literally, Leon Carter, the sports editor at the Daily News, obviously I had been performing well, kind of in what they call a general assignment role, a GA role, where I would help out Frank Isola with the Knicks one day and Rich Cimini with the Jets another day. He basically said, just do the Mets for a couple years and we'll rotate you off the beat. And 15 years later, Leon Carter actually got hired by ESPN to run the local sites when they started ESPN Boston, ESPN Chicago, and ESPN New York. And he brought me with him after 8 years covering the Mets for the Daily News. Leon got hired by ESPN New York, and he brought me along with him to continue covering the Mets. So I covered the Mets for a combined 15 years between the New York Daily News and ESPN. But so many people helped me along the way. Mark Kriegel among them, Leon Carter among them. So I mentioned Doug Segrist out in Birmingham, and there's so many other people that I could thank along the way. I would never be where I am and where I got to if not for those people.
You mentioned names like Frank Isola, Rich Cimini. They spoke to you and said, give the Mets a shot. You know, take only a couple of years on the Mets beat. You'll be able to go to something else. And you said it yourself 15 years later. I mean, you left after 15 years on the Mets beat to come into college athletics. We'll get to that after. But how many years you had at the Daily News, and you had your opportunity now at any point really to leave the Mets beat. What made you want to stay on the Mets beat as you transitioned to ESPN?
Well, I'm a very, at least as a reporter, I was a very, very competitive person, and that certainly satisfies your competitive streak. There is nothing harder sports-wise than covering a New York baseball beat. I'll go toe to toe with anyone who has issue with that, who's a journalist anywhere. It's an incredibly competitive beat, or competitive beats in New York, and baseball is the most grueling of any sport. And the bottom line is that the early years, no matter how hard you work, and I had a handful of scoops, but there's no substitute for longevity. You have to work hard, but there's no substitute for longevity in building up the sources and the way of getting stories and building up the trust in the clubhouse. And after taking a few years to build up that equity and that trust, it would have been a shame to walk away at that point. Plus, especially when ESPN kept calling, it kept getting more lucrative and more lucrative. So it made sense to keep doing it. But at some point, we'll get into it. But obviously, journalism, athletic communications now is feeling kind of the wrath of downsizing. But journalism has been experiencing that for a while, and kind of helped fuel my decision to switch careers.
When you jumped onto the Mets beat, what was it like for you? I mean, I could tell from being a freelance reporter the first time I covered a Ranger game at the Garden or an Islander game at the Coliseum, or I covered my first Mets game that I covered ever was Steven Matz's first start at Citi Field. I certainly know the nerves that were going through me. I mean, what was it like for you that first time you stepped foot into Shea? Well,
for me, covering a New York beat, I was never, it's funny, I was never really intimidated at any point in my career covering anything, because there's such a slow, gradual ascent. I was covering, like when we'll go back to the Daily Pennsylvanian, they put me, you did not just start covering baseball, men's basketball or football at the Daily Pennsylvanian. We had like 30 sports writers at the Daily Pennsylvanian. So I started, my first beat was men's tennis. My second beat was women's fencing. Then I think I covered the softball team. Then I covered the field hockey team. So it was a gradual ascent there. Then you get to Birmingham, you're covering high school sports, you're covering smaller college games. Probably the only time I was like, I don't want to say intimidated, or maybe I was intimidated a little bit, was UAB. I was the beat writer for UAB, and they were in Conference USA at the time with Cincinnati. And then they had Indiana on the schedule too. So, and this was in the heyday of Bob Huggins at Cincinnati and Bobby Knight at Indiana, both of whom could be a little excitable with the media. So asking questions of those gentlemen might have been a little intimidating for someone in their early 20s at the time. But for instance, I covered the White Sox AA team, and when I was covering the White Sox AA team, the Birmingham Barons, the Birmingham News used to send me out to Tucson, where the White Sox spring training was at the time. So I got exposure to the White Sox clubhouse, even when I was still a reporter in Birmingham, and I always gravitated towards the friendlier face, the people who passed through Birmingham were always very nice to me. So there was never a period of awe. In fact, Jerry Manuel, who I went on to cover with the Mets as a manager, was the White Sox manager at the time when I was covering the White Sox AA team. And they were Jerry was so tremendously nice and kind at the time. And even the GM at the team, I don't know why I'm drawing a blank, Ron Schuler at the time, when I would call him up as the little reporter from the Birmingham News, calling up the White Sox GM to ask a question for a feature story on, say, Mark Burley or Aaron Rowand or Joe Creedy, who was on the AA team at the time. And he would call me back a second later and give me great quotes and stuff like that. So by the time I got to the Mets beat, it really wasn't that intimidating, because I'd been around baseball for several years, and including major league players and major league clubhouses.
You spoke a little while ago about how important it is for a journalist to build up trust. How long did it take for you, I mean, to really feel, let me rephrase that. How long did it take for you to really build up that trust, to really identify yourself as a source that anyone was coming to for information?
I mean, it took a while. I don't know the exact point, but I can tell you it's intimidating when you're in your 20s to get assigned to a Mets beat. And at the time, there were lions of New York baseball covering the teams for a long period of time. At the time, Marty Noble, the late Marty Noble, who was great to me, he was covering the team for Newsday at the time. David Waldstein, who's now at the New York Times, was covering the team for the Newark Star Ledger. And the columnists, who are now more national columnists, John Heyman was at Newsday at the time, so he was breaking. He was in New York at the time, so he was breaking stuff at the time. Joel Sherman, obviously still at the Post, still doing national stuff, but he was more of a New York-centric baseball columnist at the time. He was breaking stories there. Was a columnist, Larry Rocca, at the Star Ledger at the time. Mo Rocca's brother, actually, if you know the comedian.
Sure.
So it was really, really intimidating. But over time, you just start flexing your muscles, you get more comfortable, you're breaking more stories. The point where I started to get more comfortable, I think, now that I think about it, was there was that 2000 team with Bobby Valentine and Al Leiter and John Franco, and they had been around for years and years and years, and around those reporters for years and years and years. When I got on the beat, it was toward the tail end of their careers, so I was never really going to ingratiate myself to them the same as people who had covered them for 15 or 20 years. But then things started to turn over. Art Howe came in as the manager, and then Willie Randolph, and 2005, Omar Minaya comes in, brings in Carlos Beltran and Pedro Martinez and those kinds of guys. And they started calling up the David Wrights and the Jose Reyeses. So that started to be in my wheelhouse because there was no built-in advantage there's still advantage for the older reporters who knew some front office people and knew scouts and things like that. But the playing field started to, let's say, level a little bit.
I'll never forget before I met you from working. I'll never forget our first phone call when you were talking to me about wanting to enter the collegiate athletics landscape. But before I spoke to you in a conversation over the phone, I followed you as a diehard Mets fan. I followed you on Twitter for all the news that I wanted about the Mets, and I would certainly see that some of the comments that how passionate the Mets fan base is, and how they would constantly question maybe anything you put on Twitter. But how was it for you, and this is piggybacking off what I'm saying, how was it for you continually being, especially once social media entered, how was it for you handling constantly being in the public eye? How did you handle all that scrutiny?
Well, the job got more and more difficult over the years because early on, even though the stories got posted on the internet, it was an afterthought early on. Either you had it in the nobspaper or you didn't have it in the newspaper. So if you didn't have the story in the newspaper, you had 24 hours to come back and do better the next day. For us, it obviously accelerated the life cycle of a scoop to where it would maybe last 1 minute or so because someone else could get it confirmed and tweet out the same story a minute later. The intensity also got to be, it got to be pretty intense with social media because when I left the Mets beat, I had at the time the most followers of any team-specific MLB writer anywhere. I was close to 100,000 at the time. It's receded a little bit since then, but even if 1% of the people are nasty to you, that's still, if you have 100,000 followers and 1% of the people are nasty, that's still 1,000 people telling you suck every day. I still remember Josh Tolley was a Mets catcher. And it was a big story for us when he got rid of Twitter because he basically said, I have enough people telling me I suck at the ballpark. Do I really need to go home and have them tell me I suck too? So if you remember that story. And it was the same. Obviously the intensity for the players is more than for the media covering the team, but still it wears on you. And then just the intensity of the beat of having to check your phone every second of every day. As I said, when I started, either you had it in the newspaper or you didn't have the newspaper. And if you didn't have it in the newspaper, you had to come back the next day and do better. Now, I would break a lot of stories, but if someone else broke a story, I would have to catch up a minute later. But how do you catch up a minute later? You have to know what the other people reported. That means I have to look at my phone every second of every day to see what John Heyman's tweeting, what Ken Rosenthal's tweeting, what other people on the beat are tweeting. So it's just not healthy. Look at your phone every second of every day, scrolling through Twitter so you can catch up if you miss something. And I'm very competitive. I didn't take days off or anything like that. So sure. It could wear on you after a while.
Well, I was going to ask, you had mentioned that, you have 100,000 followers, maybe you have 1,000 of those followers that certainly make insensitive comments, but how do you what's the best way? I think we all struggle through it, maybe not on a grandiose scale as a beat writer for a professional sports organization does, but how are you able to handle it? How are you able just to look past some of those insensitive comments?
I'm not saying I was perfect. I never had any major gaps or missteps. You see things really, really blow up. But having more mature now, removed from it now, it's easy to say, well, you should just take a deep breath and walk away and say, would your grandmother approve? Like I do social media training now for our student athletes here, just like I did NYIT before this. And I say, would your coach approve of what you're tweeting? Would your grandmother approve of what you're tweeting? You got to kind of just take the same approach, take a deep breath and understand there's a lot of trolls and stuff. But as I said, it's a lot easier to say than to do in practice. But just remember you represent something bigger than yourself. So just keep that in mind and understand that even if you're tempted, people are just trying to get a rise out of you, and there can be repercussions for you if you respond the wrong way.
I think that's perfectly well said. But would you say that, and I think the one moment that everyone as a Mets fan or any sports fan looks back on your career as a professional journalist, certainly had to have been the case with Omar Minaya. But is there a particular high or low you can point to in situations like that really defined your career?
In terms of social media or just
in terms of working on the Mets beat and perhaps maybe even social media as well? Yeah.
Well, in terms of social media, I think what defined my career, if I still get responses to this day, every time anyone else tweets "oh no" anywhere in the country, someone someone alerts me and says, I think they owe you a royalty or something like that. It's funny when I started. I keep saying when I started in Birmingham, how old I am and stuff like that. But when I first started in journalism, it was a totally different model. You were told to be a fly on the wall and not draw attention to yourself. You know where that would get you today? If you're a purist and do exactly what they taught you in journalism school, you know where that would get you today? Pushed out of the industry. You have to draw attention to yourself now. You have to make a name for yourself so you could drive traffic to your website. Otherwise, you're not going to be employed. So sticks like the oh no thing, and for people who don't know what that was basically anytime Twitter is, I guess Twitter instantly gets pushed out to your phones, where if you're watching the game on even cable, or if you're watching the game on DirecTV or whatever, there's like a 7-second delay, 10-second delay. So literally if I'm at the stadium and I see something bad happen to the Mets, if I tweet out, oh no, I don't know how many people, I guess a lot of people look at their phones at the same time they're looking at their TV screens. But I would tweet, oh no, before something bad happened on the screen with the Mets. And people pretended like they didn't like it. People would pretend to get upset, but I think it really entertained people. So, and I wouldn't do it constantly, but like if something really dramatically bad was about to happen, like the Mets Armando Benitez was pitching and they was about to give up a game, deciding blow a save and give up a game deciding home run. And I tweeted, oh no, as you gave up the home run and it hadn't happened on your screen yet. In the moment people are upset with me, but in retrospect, people laugh about it.
So we've mentioned it a few times. In all, you spent 15 years on the Mets beat. I kind of want to ask you some of your favorite moments and some of your favorite times, during that. I mean, it was a long time, 15 years. Do you have the Mets, I wouldn't say endured a lot of success in your time on the Mets beat, but certainly 3 seasons that stand out have to be 2000, 2006, 2015. It doesn't have to be one of those 3, but do you have a favorite season that you vividly remember among all of them?
Well, I arrived in New York actually from Birmingham, December of 2000. So I missed the Subway Series, but did get to the World Series the next year when the Yankees were playing Arizona and Mariano blew the save in Arizona. So that was the first World Series of about 12 or 13 straight that I covered. You would think that 2006 season being on the brink of the World Series or 2015 going to the World Series would be the year I would say for favorite moments. And I remember those vividly for certain reasons. David Wright and Jose Reyes on the first one. I still remember the photos of them at I guess it was Shea Stadium at the time, chopping on the cigar on the field. That's an iconic photo to this day, the young David Wright, Jose Reyes photo, and just seeing how happy they were, that made that special. And the other 2015, I still remember because David was threatening to be like a Don Mattingly type career where never won a World Series, never got to a World Series, whatever. And 2015, I still remember David, how beaming after the NLCS clincher at Wrigley Field, just seeing David underneath the bowels of Wrigley Field, just how happy and smiling he was. So that was just a favorite memory for me too, because our careers kind of followed the same arc. He was a minor leaguer when I was just starting covering the beat, and he kind of retired, or his career was fading as my career in journalism was fading as well. But long way of saying my actual favorite season was 2005. It was the new Mets. Because obviously things under Art Howe in 2003 and 2004 were struggles. And then Omar Minaya comes on board and he signs Carlos Beltran. He signs Pedro Martinez. He flirts with Carlos Delgado, who they end up acquiring the next year. And 2005 was really the launching point. I actually wrote a book about that season. It's the only sports book I've ever written. And Pedro, Carlos, and Omar is the name. I didn't come up with the name. The publisher at the time came up with the name, which I don't think was the smartest name ever. But it was just a really fun season to write about. So many things happened during this season. Obviously, they came up short of the playoffs that year, but it was really the launching point for 2006. And then after that, it was the barren wilderness with 2007, 2008 collapses. And then I covered after 2008, 6 straight losing seasons. So for everyone who romanticizes about wanting to see me back on the Mets beat, the good old days, just remember I covered 2 collapses followed by 6 straight losing seasons. So I don't know how romantic it actually was.
There are a lot of Mets managers, I would say. Well, maybe not a lot, but certainly the one that had the longest tenure was Terry Collins in your 15 years on the beat. Terry, in my time covering the Mets, certainly, he was a lot of fun to be around at a press conference or in the locker room. Do you have a favorite Mets manager from your time on the beat?
Yeah, I don't want to say a favorite one because actually once I got established on the beat, Bobby Valentine, I was kind of just caught the tail end of his, so I kind of discount that one. But when you think about Art House, such a nice man, a little overmatched in New York, but it still bothers me to this day how he's portrayed in Moneyball, because that's not Art Howe. That was not an accurate portrayal of Art Howe, because he's not a villain by any stretch. So he was a tremendously nice man. And as I was kind of breaking into a New York baseball beat, and then Willie Randolph, he was. It's funny. You mentioned I was born at the beginning. I was born in the Bronx, and the glove I had growing up. I don't know if people still, when they buy gloves, I know they buy a certain model of glove that's a player's model, but at the time, the player kind of had a fake autograph in the glove that was their glove, and I had a Willie Randolph glove growing up. So to cover Willie Randolph was an absolute thrill. Growing up, once I covered the Mets, and he had a little bit of a chip on his shoulder that he hadn't been given a chance earlier. He was very defensive as in press conferences, but I got along with him really well. It's funny, he and Tony Bernard were oil and water, and every time Willie saw me talking to Tony Bernard, he used to give me the evil eye because he disliked Willie. Willie disliked Tony Bernard so much. But then Jerry Manuel, again, I knew him even from going to Tucson when I was covering the minor league team, the Birmingham Barons. He was the bench coach for Willie, and then became the manager when Willie had that 3 a.m. fire. Sure. He was incredibly good to me too, and Jerry was very kind of like Zen kind of cerebral in a way. I don't know if that's an actual description, but he was a lot more practical than Willie. Willie always used to get angry that the front office would tell him what to do, or lineups and things like that. Jerry's like, just give me the paycheck, tell me what to do, whatever. He knew how to play. Jerry knew how to play the game. But I don't want to say Terry's my favorite manager of all the managers, but if Jerry was good with playing, like knowing how to deal with the media, Terry was phenomenal. He was as open as anyone, probably too open for the organization's liking, but he was incredibly forthcoming, colorful, always available, old school in a way where you got the old stories and stuff like that. So all the managers I covered with the Mets, I really, really enjoyed, and they were, as I described, they're very different, but they were all incredibly kind to me. I really was blessed to have great relationships with all of the managers I covered, and it really helped me cover the team well.
Certainly along your trails in 15 years, you certainly traveled to a lot of cities in your time. Do you have, you've traveled the United States. I don't think maybe there's a state you've never been to, but do you have a favorite city in your career that you've traveled to? Any favorite eats along the way?
Oh, well, in terms of ballparks, the two favorite, or ballpark / cities, the two favorite, the first one I'm going to name, you wouldn't actually think unless you've been there. Pittsburgh is once things get normal, it's close enough to New York. I presume a fair percentage of the people watching are from the New York area. Go to a road. The next time the Mets or even the Yankees, if there's interleague or whatever, the next time they're in Pittsburgh, go to a game at Pittsburgh. That is a unbelievable place to watch a game. The ballpark opens up to the Allegheny River. You have the yellow Roberto Clemente Bridge going over the Allegheny from center field to downtown. I used to stay at the Renaissance Hotel, which was like the little arch at the other end of that bridge, the Roberto Clemente Bridge, and used to look back into the ballpark. It was just a wonderful, wonderful city to go to. And the other favorite is San Francisco. The energy of the ball, I don't know what it's like now, but the energy in the ballpark at the time was unbelievable. There's always the one thing I didn't like about San Francisco was the Seagulls, because if you think like New York Seagulls or Atlantic Seagulls are angry people, Pacific Seagulls are downright nasty. They will attack you. And they would descend on the ballpark, AT&T Park, at least if it's still called that. They would descend on the ballpark at the end of the game when the fans cleared out, and they were angry people, and the reporters were still there writing their stories. But the San Francisco, there was always a buzz in the ballpark. Again, it opened up to kind of the water in McCovey Cove. You had the smell of garlic fries and I think some marijuana mixed in with it. And it was just the buzz there was always sold out. It seemed like it was just and then the city right there. I used to stay at it was called Stanford Court, the hotel. It used to be a Marriott property on Nob Hill whenever I could, and used to walk to the ballpark, which was a long hike, although fortunately it was mostly downhill. And it was just tremendously walking around downtown San Francisco. It was never particularly warm there, but it was always a fun trip as well.
It's funny how those were the two cities you mentioned, because those are my two favorite ballparks to go to. I've seen a handful of them, and San Francisco and Pittsburgh to me top the list by a country mile. Now, granted, I've never been to Camden Yards, and I hear great things, but San Francisco and Pittsburgh, for our viewers, if you've never been, I highly recommend you go. I mean, San Francisco, I recommend you sit upstairs, go see the bay. It's really two beautiful cities, two gorgeous stadiums, and really it's a great experience. You've now been out of the professional sports beat now for 3 or 4 years now, right, Adam? I believe.
Yeah, I joined NYIT, I want to say in February 2017, and that year I actually continued to write 4 times a week for SNY during that 2017 season while I was doing full-time SID work, and did a few freelance assignments covering games for the New York Post, but I decided after that to go full throttle with the SID work, and it was, as you can probably see from the way I've talked, and I'm wired pretty intensely, and even though I was doing stuff part-time for SNY and a little stuff for the New York Post, I was watching every game, I was watching every post-game press conference and stuff, and it was a little too much. So either I was going to have to be all in, or I was going to have to kind of to give up on that. So I decided to just go full throttle with the athletic communications work after that.
I would say after you arrived at NYIT, did you have any withdrawals, even though you were still contributing to SNY and ESPN? Was it weird for you that you weren't walking into Citi Field or some sort of visiting ballpark anymore?
You know what? I had thought about it for so many years going to athletic communications. I actually went on a ton of, ESPN didn't know, but I went on a ton of interviews and actually got a handful of pretty impressive offers at the time. And ESPN kept giving me new contracts, so I kept kind of deciding to stay. So by the time I left, it was time to make the career change. I actually had at least one very, very tangible opportunity to continue in New York, even covering the Mets. When my time at ESPN was up, ESPN began to dismantle its baseball coverage. You saw even like lions of ESPN baseball, like Jason Stark and Jerry Krasnick get let go, in addition to the local writers. But the state, as much as we talk about athletic communication struggling right now, journalism is really withering, at least the newspaper model, and even ESPN too is or was really suffering. And so if I went to let's say Newsday at the time in my 40s and go to Newsday, they're more stable than most newspapers, but what's the future of any newspaper at this point? So I think I'd be perpetually looking for jobs for the rest of my career if I stayed in journalism. And it gets harder and harder as you get older. Even The Athletic is getting a lot of buzz right now, but will that model really work? And if it doesn't work, there's going to be 400, 500, 600 sports writers all on the market at the same time who are employed by them. So it's a difficult, as much as in athletic communications right now, we're struggling. If you think about what's happening in sports writing right now, it's an even more difficult time for those people.
I was going to ask, as a respect of the withdrawals, did you ever wake up at home one day, reach for the phone, and call room service, or no?
Well, to this day, though, I can't use them right now because of COVID, obviously, but I still have over 1 million Marriott points and about 400,000 miles on Delta. So I won't be paying for a vacation for a while. The one benefit of being on the road for 170 days a year for 15 straight years. But just one aside, if I could tell you how nice a person David Wright is, I still remember I was covering I switched to NYIT in February of 2017. And shortly after that, the NYIT women's basketball team is in the NCAA tournament, actually playing at Adelphi of all places. And I get a call during spring training from none other than David Wright, just saying that he regrets that I'm not there for the first time in 16 years, and just wishing me well and stuff like that. And to tell you how nice David Wright is, for him, you can see, what's happening in the country right now. Journalists aren't always held in the highest esteem these days, and obviously there's a strata where players are kind of different than the journalists, and they're not for the most part friends. So to have gotten that respect was really nice. In fact, David later that year, or actually I should say a year or two later, once we hired Frank Catalanato at NYT as the baseball coach, came at my invitation to a baseball practice for us, and I'm forever grateful for that too. David, I list so many people who were nice to me over the years, and David is off the charts nice. He's, if not the nicest person I ever met in baseball, one of the top 3 or 4.
Yeah, I remember being at the game when against the Phillies on a Wednesday night in April, when they had pulled him off the field and he had been diagnosed with spinal stenosis, and it was really an unfortunate, I wouldn't say an end to his career, because he did come back and help propel the Mets to the World Series. And one of his best moments, besides the home run that he hit that when he came back against the Phillies in Philly, is certainly the home run that he hit in Game 3 of the World Series. And I was going to ask you, what was the loudest, in your opinion? It could be Shea or City. What was the loudest you really ever heard either stadium? Was it the 9/11 home run by Piazza, the catch by Andy Chavez in 06? What was it?
Oh boy, you're putting me on the spot. Honestly, I mean, I remember the Piazza home run after September 11th. I don't think anything will ever top that in terms of moment. And my memory it was deafening. So I'll go with that. But that one, I'm usually not on the spot on questions, but that one you may have got me.
Wow, I got Adam Rubin. I got to mark that down on the resume. Last question with respect to your career as a sports journalist, a professional sports journalist. What would you say after your 15 years in the business, at least on the Mets, and subsequently, or I should say, proceeding from your time in Alabama? What would you say to an aspiring journalist, someone that really wants to get their feet wet and join the beat?
Yeah. Well, I remember when I was at the Daily Pennsylvania in the 90s, Ken Rosenthal was a columnist at the Baltimore Sun at the time. And we still have journalism conferences at the Daily Pennsylvania every year where we bring back alumni to talk to the current students. I organized it for several years myself after graduating. And Ken in the 1990s came back and at the Baltimore Sun at the time and was cautioning people to be cautious about entering the field in the 90s because of the unstableness financially of the industry and things like that. And you look at how he's ascended all the way since then to being a dominant baseball force for Fox. I graduated, had a nice career covering the Mets. So I would never dissuade someone from entering the journalism industry. Is it going to be challenging? Yes, but there'll always be a need for information. It's just a question of how it's monetized and how it's packaged. That's always going to evolve. So I would never discourage someone from going into the industry. Just you need to go in with eyes wide open. But that said, there are so many opportunities if you're entrepreneurial to really make a name for yourself with low barriers to entry. You're doing this report 20 years ago, 15 years ago, to be able to produce this kind of thing would have been unheard of without like a big entry cost. Now it's a pretty reasonable investment to be able to do something like this. So if you're creative, there's always a way. There'll always be needed for information. And what I would say too is don't discount the working on the team side, the athletic communication side at the college level, because college athletic communications has evolved so much since I was in college. It used to be pitching stories to the newspaper and preparing the game notes for the media and that kind of thing, and receiving calls from the media. And don't get me wrong, if the New York Times or ABC or CBS does a feature on Stony, Brook, or before that NYT, it's great for us to amplify our message, but so much of it is creating our own content these days to reach our audience. So, and journalists would frown on us doing the same thing on this side, because obviously we're doing it with a positive tone. We're not doing exposés on the number of positive COVID tests or anything like that, or what our staff salaries are or anything like that. But the skill set is really very similar. And the way athletic communications evolved, it's a perfect avenue for people who have journalism backgrounds or studying journalism. So whether you're working for Mets.com or you're working for an athletic communications department creating content, whether it's video content, the skills of a journalist are going to be needed no matter how the industry has evolved. So I would never dissuade someone from going into journalism. Just remember, you're in the information industry, and while the information mode may change, there'll always be a need for that information.
Would you say in hindsight that the business has changed at all? At least
the athletic communications business?
Of it?
I'm sorry, the athletic communications business?
No, the journalism business. I meant to preface that.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I can't even remember the names of them now. Like ESPN had Grantland. There were a lot of long-form websites, and those stories those stories are very valuable to journalism, investigative news pieces. But at the same time, they take a lot of investment. They take a lot of man hours to produce, and they may not result in the clicks to monetize it. So there's a disincentive for newspapers or journalists in general to produce really good features or really good stories or investigative pieces that take a long time. You don't want to. The opposite is clickbait, but not clickbait, but things that drive traffic are the things that incentivize people to come to your website. So that's where you get the advertising revenue and things like that. So yeah, the Athletic's trying a model that they're selling their writing, and I hope that works for all the people in the journalism industry. But another trend, for instance, is people using their mobile phones to consume the news instead of laptops or desktops or reading it in the newspaper. So that means if you're just scrolling on your phone, there's going to be shorter stories than in the past. I'd say maybe 75% of traffic at most colleges now on their websites is from mobile, not from desktop or laptop. So the way people consume news changes, so the stories get shorter too. So if you're looking to go find a job where you could just write one long form piece a week, those jobs are few and far between. The people who are rewarded the most are the ones who are churning out copy all the time. And sometimes that's not the most rewarding thing in the world.
Before we move on, I certainly want to share a personal Adam Rubin story of mine. Nothing embarrassing, but I didn't know Adam at this point, but I vividly remember June of 2015 and coming down to Citi Field to cover my first Mets game, and remember exactly where I sat for that game. And I was in the second row all the way off to the left, and I looked down at the first row, and there's Adam Rubin to the left, and Anthony DiComo from MLB.com to the right, and Jared Diamond from the Wall Street Journal. And the intimidation factor for me, as an aspiring journalist, and at the time I'm 31, 36 now, but an aspiring journalist, someone who wants to see himself one day in the professional sports beat, to have the opportunity not to actually go downstairs and go talk to you guys, but just admiring you guys from afar. I wish I would have known then what I know now. So.
Well, I think Jared Diamond and Anthony DiComo would be thrilled you called them intimidating, because you might be the first person to ever call them intimidating.
So as you had mentioned earlier, Adam, that you departed the professional sports beat in 2017. You're named the assistant athletic director for strategic communications at New York Tech. 15 years on the beat. What drew the move? Most SIDs aspire to go pro. What drew the move? What made you want to work in collegiate athletics?
Well, for people who followed me on Twitter over the years with the Mets, they'll know that my brother, he actually just stepped down recently, at least for a year, give a hiatus. He was the MacArthur High School basketball coach for 14 years, the varsity coach. He was the division JV coach in Levittown before that. But I was basically his SID for 14 years when he was the varsity coach there. I would send stories to the weekly Levittown Tribune. The best written stories, I will tell you, in the Levittown Tribune were the MacArthur game recaps over the years that I was submitting. I would take photos of his games and put them on Facebook or so for the parents. I would do program for his game tournaments. So I was an SID for that long before I was ever doing it as a career. And so I knew I would enjoy it. Obviously, I don't want to say that what I was doing for MacArthur High School basketball on a very limited basis was the same as what college SID does, but I knew I was going to enjoy it. In fact, in 2015, the year the Mets went to the World Series, my brother's high school basketball team won the school's first playoff basketball game in about 10 years or so. And at the time, I was more ecstatic about my brother's high school team winning a playoff basketball game than the Mets going to the World Series, which tells you how much emotionally I invested in, and it's what it means to be kind of on the team side, kind of living and dying with every moment, as opposed to kind of chronicling someone else's moment, which is what a journalist does. So I knew I was going to enjoy it. I mentioned that I was on the road for 15 years, for 170 days a year, and then working nights and weekends when I was at home. So obviously that was intense, and I could have used a break from that. But that alone, I don't think was the motivating factor. And also I mentioned about how social media made it a nonstop 24/7, have to look at your phone every second of every day, unhealthy kind of job. So that was part of it. But I think the primary thing was that the journalism industry is literally crumbling. That model, working for newspapers or working for media outlets. And if I decided to jump to another media outlet, then, as I said, I think I would be perpetually jumping to media outlets throughout the rest of my career. So it was the time to make a switch to what at the time seemed a little more stable profession. Obviously, as we mentioned, athletic communications has been hit pretty hard at some places now too. So I knew I was gonna enjoy it, and I haven't been disappointed by it at all. It's just experiencing the moments I experienced right when I first started at NYIT, D2 school. We went up to the women's basketball team had never won a game at Roberts Wesleyan College, and East Coast Conference, the Division II conference, which at the time had NYT, Malloy, LIU Post. We get sent up for a first-round women's basketball game right after I started at Roberts Wesleyan, where we never won a game. And the women's basketball team wins that game and advances, and ultimately makes the NCAA tournament, like I mentioned, to play at Adelphi in the NCAA tournament. And to be on that bus ride back overnight, 7 hours from Rochester back to Long Island after that win, you wouldn't think that would be very enjoyable, a 7-hour overnight bus ride from Rochester back to New York. But seeing what it meant to the young ladies on the team to win that game, advance, and keep their hopes alive, and when the tournament was over up there, to have advanced to the NCAA tournament, having been on that bus ride going home, you could see why even the Mets going to the World Series, where you're chronicling someone else's moment versus being part of a moment, being the part of the moment was so much more attractive.
I mean, I'll be the first to say it in agreement with you, Adam, to see the student athletes smiling, the rewarding experience of watching the student athletes win and getting to cover something like that, there's just nothing like it. And that's why today we're in the field that we are. Transitioning from the journalism side to really what athletic communications is, the public relations side, what was really, because you didn't really get your feet wet anywhere else, as an SID. So what was really the biggest adjustment for you professionally that you had to make?
Well, I'm very thankful, as I mentioned, to Stephen Gorchov, even though he's now with the rival. I'm at Stony Brook, he's at Hofstra, but we were friendly when I was covering the Mets, and he was the Hofstra SID at the time, obviously. So before I started, the one thing anyone who's in athletic communication knows, we're segueing now to Genius for NCAA stats, software entry during games, but at the time it was an exclusively antiquated program called Stat Crew, and I know it's something you could pick up, but I knew nothing of it whatsoever. So Stephen, we were getting close to the spring seasons when I got hired. So I went over to Hofstra, and he and his assistants gave me a crash course in baseball, softball, Stat Crew, which I remember. And then my first week I was at the Stony Brook, the NYT women's basketball team and men's basketball team were playing at Malloy. So Kelly Thompson and Patrick at McCormick at Malloy gave me some tidbits about how to post to Presto. We were Presto at the time before we switched to Sidearm for our website provider. And so those kinds of things were things that you needed to learn. But I'll give credit to Dwayne Bailey, who was the athletic director at NYT when I got hired, and is now, I think, the CFO at Louisiana Lafayette for athletics. And he, to his credit, he saw the value in creating content and knew if I was tied during the games to the stats entry program, whether it was Stat Crew or Genius, that I couldn't create content during games. So he would freelance out at a nice figure for us to hire, whether it was Adam Gudis, who's a kind of a local former SID, who's now a teacher, to enter the stats during games, which would free me up to take photos during games, write stories during games. So we went from NYT when I arrived, they were posting maybe a press release 3 hours after the game that was kind of a press release form to basically a rapid reaction, like a Met-style rapid reaction. Literally, people marveled the second the game was over at NYT. There was a story posted about it with a photo from that game. Then we'd sub it out with quotes and things like that. So we really instituted a journalism approach right away. And then I got to hire a couple really talented graduate assistants who have gone on to nice things since completing their GA positions at NYT. And once I had a team in place, we really took off.
You're going on now your fourth season. You're second at Stony Brook, but your fourth season overall in the sports information field. Would you say in this short time that the sports information field, athletic communications, we wear so many titles in this business, has the sports information field for you really grown into a labor of love?
It's something I love. It's funny. I'm going to insult a whole bunch of SIDs when I say this, but everyone told me how hard, work-wise, hours-wise, it consumes being an SID. I'm probably the only person who came into the industry and thought it was relatively relaxing because of the amount of hours I put in covering a baseball beat in New York. Literally, when I was covering a baseball beat in New York, I would stay up till because I would write what was called a morning briefing, basically an aggregation of everything everyone else was reporting that would get posted like 6 a.m. So I would stay up after covering a Mets game, producing all the Mets content for that night. I would stay up to like 2 a.m. and write the morning briefing for the next morning that posted at 6 a.m. Then I would sleep. By 7 or 8 o'clock, I was up again and producing content like a minor league report from daytime content on the website, and then rinse and repeat. So literally, I was getting in season, I was getting 5 hours of sleep a day and working 18, 19 hours a day. So as much as I respect the workload in athletic communications, nothing anywhere in the world compares to a New York baseball beat. So I actually felt like I could exhale a little bit ever since then. And I hope I didn't insult anybody, but just one thing exclusive to being a New York baseball writer.
Speaking of working in professional baseball, you had mentioned this earlier, but we'll bring it up again, that you had spent some of your time, your head baseball coach at New York Tech is a New York Tech alum and a former Major League Baseball first baseman, Frank Catalanato. And before you left Tech, the spring before you left Tech, you basically closed out your career there with an opportunity to go to the Division II College World Series. This coming after Tech had been a Division I program, an independent Division I baseball program for a couple of decades. So what was that experience like for you? I mean, I know you had seen some World Series on the grand stage in terms of Major League Baseball, but what was it like going to the Division II College World Series?
Well, I'll say this, that I mentioned how much it meant to me to my brother's high school basketball team winning a playoff game for the first time in his career, the first time in the school's history in about 10 years or so. And I mentioned what it was like watching the women's basketball team when I first arrived there, clinch an NCAA tournament berth, and then make and the bus ride home. The most fun I've mentioned covering Olympics and stuff like that. The most fun I've ever had with a season and a team was the NYT, New York Tech baseball team, the year Frank Catalanato was hired. I'll take a couple steps back. You alluded to the D1. NYT, New York Tech was D1 in baseball for 30 years, 35 years or so, and dropped. My first year there was their final year in D1. They only had, I think, 4 wins that year. Then they dropped to D2. No one transferred, so they dropped to D2 in the ECC, still having that Division I talent. No one had transferred, and they went 13-25-1 their first year in D2 with a whole bunch of D1 players. And so they decided to make a coaching change. And fortunately, I was given some leeway, given my connections, to start recruiting a coach. And I was really, really, really ambitious. I even asked David Wright if he would be interested, because I'm not kidding, because he was retiring. And David told me at the time that the only thing he would ever coach is his daughter's Little League team. He wants nothing to do with baseball on any regular basis. But I asked Mike Baxter, who was who had a great catch in Johan Santana's no-hitter. He was the Vanderbilt recruiting coordinator at the time, and obviously Vanderbilt is a juggernaut program now. So a year or two earlier, I may have been able to get Mike Baxter, but the one I really wanted, and someone will attest to this, when we first knew we were going to make a coaching change, Junior Salazar ran the facilities for athletics at NYT, and I asked him if you could pick one person anywhere who would who could be who we could get to be our head coach, who's maybe borderline attainable, who would you want to recruit? And he thought about it overnight, asked a few people, and he came back to me today and said the next day and said Frank Catalanato. And I smiled because I had already reached out to Frank. He was the number one choice for me. He had never gone to college, which made it even more fascinating. He got drafted. He had signed with Seton Hall, but he got drafted by, I think it was the Tigers, right out of high school, out of Smithtown West High School, and went pro. And to tell you the job that he did in a long roundabout way, he took a 13-25-1 team, really didn't have a chance to recruit his first year, and his first year at NYT took them to the College World Series for D2, which tells you how much coaching is important and not just having talent. I knew the first day of fall practices that things were going to be different. There was more instruction, not to malign the previous staff or anything like that, but there was more instruction the first day of practice in the fall than there had been the entire previous year under Frank. And it wasn't just Frank. There were the assistant coaches actually were all Tech alums. Chris Rojas, Jimmy Gales, and Ray Gianelli were all on the staff along with Frank Battaglia. So they had one former college coach, Frank Battaglia, who had been a coach at Queens. But the other 3 guys, plus Frank, had to combine 50 years of pro playing experience. And having played in the pros doesn't necessarily make you a great college coach or a great coach in general, but these guys were fabulous, fabulous teachers. To have 4 guys who either played in AAA or the majors on a staff of a Division II team, they changed things immediately. They brought a swagger right away to a team that didn't have a lot of confidence. Then we brought in David Wright to that practice that following, leading into that upcoming season. He gave them even more confidence that you're important, you can do this. I still remember the speech that David gave. You can find it on YouTube. SNY filmed it too. It was a fabulous, fabulous speech. and it set the tone for going to the College World Series that year. I still remember just going to the College World Series, just having clinched. We were decided underdogs. That going into even the regional, we were the 5 seed in the regional and went through everybody to get to the College World Series, and we just outslugged people, and it was just a phenomenal experience, and it meant so much to me because I saw how beaten down those kids were from being D1 to going to D2 and not winning games through no fault of their own, then getting the proper coaching in there and what they achieved that first year. It was just miraculous, and it pains me to see, and I'm sure we'll get into it in a second, but it pains me to see what happened to NYT Athletics because they were on the verge of building a juggernaut at NYT, and I know it's not a great time to be looking for a coaching job right now, but some school in the area is going to, because he has a young family or family still in school, is going to scoop up Frank Calinado and his assistants as a baseball coach in the near future. And they're going to inherit, or they're going to get a phenomenal staff that's currently free agents. I could not speak more highly of them.
Well, I guess right on cue, the perfect segue is you had left New York Tech for Stony Brook in December. A few months later, we hit March, and COVID-19 hits its peak, and all athletics across the country shuts down and, cancels the NCAA Division I tournament only a few days before Selection Sunday. And, you fast forward to summer, and in August, New York Tech says that they're going to be temporarily, obviously in the wake of all this economic crisis, in the wake of COVID-19, that they're going to temporarily shut down all athletic programs for 2 years. Even though you were at Stony Brook at the time, you had given 2 years of your career to New York Tech. What was it like for you hearing that news?
Yeah, I was just very sad for all the coaches there, and particularly for the student athletes there, because honestly, I know everyone thinks they would want to be at a D1 school and be at Notre Dame or be at Florida State or Alabama or wherever. I could attest, and it's no disparagement to Stony Brook, but I was the sports information department with a couple of GAs at NYT, so I lived and died with every single team there every day, and I had no more fun than when I was a D2 SID. So it pained me for all those kids, and I as much as they said a 2-year hiatus due to COVID, the school has some underlying financial issues, and they even turned off the athletics website, which is painful to me, which gives you a little insight into whether 2 years from now it may actually be back. So it's certainly painful for all those kids. I particularly all the teams, but to watch the baseball team and what they had built. I mean, EJ Cumbo, for instance, is a guy who almost won the national batting title. He hit, I want to say, like 450 for us at NYT the year we went to the College World Series. To watch him transfer to Tampa, which may be the defending national champion, was painful to me. I just saw 3 of our players from NYT transfer to Franklin Pierce. There's some guys scattered. We're actually, I can't say anything about it, but I think we might end up getting one person here at Stony Brook too. It's just painful to see those people have to scatter and find new homes, and some of them aren't going to get new homes. This is the end of their college career, because there's a limit to how long you can keep extending college just because you keep having more eligibility. So it's really sad for the entire department. But the baseball, it hit me particularly hard because they were really on the precipice of being the East region. It's a lot. When we went to the College World Series, we got our butt handed to us a little bit. The pitchers from like San Diego and Tampa, they were just a different breed. They walked in throwing 95 miles an hour and 6'5", even though we were D2 pitchers. And I think it opened the NYT baseball staff with the kind of players they had to recruit, not just to win the region, but to be nationally competitive. And they were starting to recruit those kind of players. So I really feel like given a little more time, they would have been the dominant force in the East and a national title contender. So it's just really painful.
I certainly hope and wish New York Tech all the best, and hopefully, they come back sooner than they anticipate. Let's shift the timeline over to Stony Brook. And when you arrived at Stony Brook, as I mentioned in December, you arrived right in the thick of basketball season. We fast forward the timeline again to March. The women's basketball team is having a record year. They're on the verge of winning, the precipice of the cusp, so to speak, of winning an America East championship, have an opportunity to go to the NCAA tournament for the first time ever. And then on the eve of Stony Brook hosting the America East Final. And if anyone's ever been to Island Federal Credit Union Arena, it is a gorgeous facility. Can you take us really through those first couple of months at Stony Brook and what happened, on the eve when the NCAA decided to cancel the season?
Yeah, obviously when you started a new job after 3 months, you don't want to start having to work remotely for the next 8 months with your new staff. So and not have any sports to cover, games to cover. So it was certainly an interesting experience. Obviously there's larger thoughts in the nation than that plight. But again, you really feel badly for that women's basketball team because they had won 22 straight games at one point during the year, the longest active winning streak at that point in the country. They started getting votes in the national poll. They were one win from their first NCAA tournament, like you mentioned, and to see the season plug pulled like that was just heartbreaking. I still remember that I'm sure everybody at every NCAA institution experienced a similar thing. Our athletic director had gathered the student athletes who were around to talk to them about kind of the plans for what was going forward, and it went from maybe not having fans in the arena to not having an NCAA tournament to an entire spring seasons canceled too in a matter of minutes. So it was just a crazy sequence of events. And at the time, people thought maybe you get your year of eligibility back, but people thought their college careers were over and stuff like that. So it's certainly a very emotional time. And I think they'll be doing documentaries about that for years to come. I wish we had, having been a former journalist, I know I was relatively new at the time and I didn't really know a lot of people. And so I didn't want to violate kind of people's privacies and stuff like that. But one of the things I'm kicking myself about now, looking back, is we should have been rolling tape on a lot of those meetings the athletic director had with the student athletes and things like that. So we had a lot of footage so we could do kind of a retrospective on that era at some point. And we don't have a lot of that footage now that we ought to have.
Well, hindsight's always 20/20, right, Adam?
No, definitely. I'm sure even my journalism career, I could tell you a million things I wish I would have done differently now that I know how it evolved.
Well, I could certainly imagine your answer to my next question. The season's tipping off next week. Thanksgiving's here, and the start of the season is scheduled for the day before. And I can only imagine, what's your level of excitement right now?
Yes, we haven't had a game at home since I don't recall whether the men's basketball lost in the America East semifinals or the women's basketball win in the America East semifinals came last. But regardless, it was mid-March, our last game. So it's literally more than 8 months since our last game. So knock on wood, you see every day things coming up that kind of thwart games. But November 25th for both our teams will be the season openers in 9 days. So hopefully everything remains. Our student athletes have behaved or responded incredibly well under difficult circumstances. We've gone out for our other sports are all completed practicing for the fall, which and sent home if they could get home to finish classes remotely at this point. And so the only teams on campus right now are men's and women's basketball teams. They're getting tested 3 times a week and I think responding to the calls to behave cautiously and not interact with people outside our bubble, so to speak. So hopefully we can get through the season, have a NCAA tournament, and I'm really proud of the way they performed so far. And I know everyone's going to be really, really thrilled. We even streamed in recent weeks some of our intra-squad games. And to tell you how popular our women's lacrosse team is, we streamed a women's lacrosse intra-squad game. And I haven't checked the figures today, but as of a week ago, like a day or two after the stream, we had 7,000 views of our women's lacrosse team's intra-squad game on Twitter alone. So it tells you how popular that team is, and just more generally the hunger to see live action again. So looking forward to real games starting next week. Well,
I was going to say to you, it helps that the Stony Brook head women's lacrosse coach is a legend at Adelphi and Joe Spallina. So I just want to engage in a few final questions with you here, Adam. First, I would ask you, as you look back on your whole career, and who has really been your biggest inspiration in life to help you achieve the goals that you have?
Oh boy, I mean, I can name a million different people who helped me along the way. There's people I didn't mention that the names probably wouldn't mean anything to anybody, but I still think about my time at the Delhi, Pennsylvania, and when I wanted to get into the journalism industry. And like you asked me some advice for people today about how to get into the journalism industry. When I was in my teenage years as a freshman, sophomore Penn, and thought I wanted to go into this, I had no earthly idea how to actually pursue it. And there was a lady at the time at the Philadelphia Inquirer, the big newspaper in Philadelphia, Arlene Morgan, who was the recruiter for the Philadelphia Inquirer at the time. To tell you how good the economy was at the time, newspapers actually had recruiters to get talent. Now they have hatchet men to fire people, but back in the day, they actually had recruiters to add to their staffs. And she was so kind and just told me all the pointers, even though I wasn't going to get hired straight out of college at the Philadelphia Inquirer, one of the biggest papers in the country. She helped me and basically was the one that kind of helped me get to places like the Birmingham News as a launching pad for my career. Then I get to Birmingham, and I mentioned Doug Segrist was the guy who picked my application out of a pile to get the internship. But I literally went down to Alabama, being from Long Island, 1,000 miles from home. And I know people go off to college, but when you're from Long Island, you go down to Alabama a few years after My Cousin Vinny comes out and stuff like that. It's kind of an interesting time in your life. And there was a guy, Ron Ingram, who was the prep sports editor at the time, the high school sports editor at the time at the Birmingham News, who treated me like his own son when I was first down there at 19 years old and made sure I was okay all the time. So still grateful to this day. He's now talking about me transitioning from journalism to communication side. Ron is now the head of the communications for the Alabama High School Athletic Association, and Doug Segrist works in communications for a bank. So a lot of really good people who have gotten pushed out of the industry. Tom Arenberg, who was the sports editor at the Birmingham News at the time, is now a professor or a researcher at the University of Alabama. So all those guys really, really helped me, and countless others there. And then so many people at the New York Daily News helped me in my career. The legendary baseball columnist Bill Madden was so influential in my career. So many of my early stories that had my byline on it were his scoops. So there's as a funny aside, Bill used to tell the story preceding me getting there. But obviously, if I'm writing a story and I'm using a source, and Bill's telling me to write the story with his source, you have faith that he's telling you the right thing, but it's still your name on the story. So he told the story to me once that someone asked him, someone like in my shoes asked him, well, who's your source? And Bill's response, I'm your source. But he was such a tremendous influence in my career, and I learned so much from him. I still, Anthony McCarron covered the you see him still on SNY. Sure. Anthony McCarron was the Yankees beat writer for the Daily News when I was the Mets beat writer. And literally, I mean, I said I wasn't intimidated early in my career, but still covering a New York baseball beat when you're going up against titans in the journalism industry in New York who've been covering it for 20 years, and you're kind of going into it cold, you need a little help early on. And Anthony, before we went to spring training that year, he went to Tampa with the Yankees. I went to St. Lucie with the Mets. I took him out. Well, he took me out to lunch probably because he was making a nice salary at the time, and I probably wasn't. We went out to lunch, and he gave me some pointers. I still to this day, I just moved recently closer to Stony Brook, and I still to this day have the yellow steno pad with the notes that he gave me. I actually take a photo when I switched careers. I think I took a photo of the page with all the notes he had given me back 20 years ago about how to cover a baseball beat. And I sent him the photo and says, I still have this to this day. So, I mean, and then Leon Carter was not that people want to hear all these names, but Leon Carter was a sports editor at the Daily News, and then my sports editor at ESPN. And then there's so many people who helped me once I got to the athletic communications field too, and even before to help the transition. Stephen Gorchov was very helpful. I know Stephen last week mentioned Tom Reardon at UNC Wilmington. Well, Tom is an NYT alum and took a liking early on to what we were accomplishing at NYT. So we got to converse. And I actually called him even this past week to run something by him and ask him a question about something in the industry that I wasn't overly familiar with. So there's so many people that helped me throughout the years. Obviously, Dwayne Bailey, the athletic director who hired me at NYT. I mean, I could go on and on and on. The GAs at NYT, Brendan Bowling and John Piersos were beyond extraordinary. John's now, I think, a TV reporter in Watertown, New York, while Brendan just got a job with IMG Learfield doing graphic design. So many guys helped me in my career that I'm so grateful for.
I asked you this question from your days, in the field of journalism. I'm going to ask you the question now as an SID. I would say during these, uncertain and trying times, we're seeing a lot of turnover in the business. We're seeing a lot of schools not hiring. How would you tell an aspiring SID to really keep their head up during this difficult time?
I mean, it's not easy, obviously. But the same thing as journalism. There's always going to be a need for information. It may have to be leaner and meaner, just like journalism all those years. They kept saying do more with less. So the journalism industry may be ahead of the curve in what's headed for athletic communications, where maybe the Division II, Division III model applied to D1, not at the Power 5 schools, but at the other schools. That may be the model at some point, where it's a lot leaner and you have to rely on GAs and a lot more student help. And maybe you have to be a little more realistic with the content you can produce because of the economic model that's going to be in place. But there'll always be a need. And when you're young, take advantage of the fact that you can still be on your parents' health insurance, and even find like a GA position where you could get your a stipend and hopefully housing and a meal plan and just serve your time. That internship I had, that year-long internship in Birmingham, I still remember, paid $350 a week. And granted, $350 a week in the 1990s goes further than $350 a week these days, but still $350 a week is $350 a week. So sometimes early on you have to bite the bullet. Unfortunately, it's not fair, but that's the realities. But the good thing, and it applies to journalism also, is that as it becomes more tough financially for institutions like it does for newspapers, they're more apt to go young, because young, it kind of correlates with cheaper, which is unfair to older people who end up getting pushed out of the industry because people don't want to pay for that experience and that insight. But it does benefit people entering the industry.
I got to ask, Adam, aside from your busy schedule, I mean, during the 8 months that we've all been home, have you taken on any hobbies? You said you've moved a little closer to Stony Brook. Any new hobbies, projects? You take on any Netflix? Anything that's piqued your interest during quarantine?
I'm not a huge Netflix person, although I did start watching. Well, two things. I'll confess, I've watched. I don't know if it's manly to say I watch HGTV over the years, but I do like HGTV. So I started watching on Netflix. There's a show, Grand Designs, which is based out of the UK, that I really enjoy. And on Hulu, I started getting into Starship Atlantis. What is it called? Stargate Atlantis. I started getting into that as well, and just kind of, I actually got in a lot better. Not that I was in poor shape, but I got in a lot better shape too, because I've done CrossFit for several years now. The Mets strength and conditioning coach Jim Malone, at the time I was kind of getting off the Mets beat, was recommended doing CrossFit, so I started getting into CrossFit. So obviously you can't go to the gym during what was going on with COVID during the height of it in New York, but I did. They were doing Zoom classes from my CrossFit gym, so I was doing it more and more frequently, to where I was doing it like 3 or 4 times a week. So I did get more and more into to CrossFit. The good thing about doing CrossFit on Zoom is that if you have your lens on your laptop or whatever camera you're using pointed the right way, if you go down to do a burpee or whatever, they can't really see if you actually went all the way down to the floor or not. So you can cheat. You're only cheating yourself, but you can cheat a little bit. But those shows and the CrossFit, probably the things I did most. I'm really into photography too. That's really my passion. I mentioned Anthony Causey at the beginning. I was interested in photography, and he really took me under his wing and taught me so much about photography. So I was really grateful when some of like the collegiate baseball league started. I know the Hamptons League never started this past summer, but we had some guys playing on Long Island. We had some guys playing in New Jersey, and I would just go photograph them during the at least the late summer. And that I get more pleasure out of, even though I was a writer for the most part of my career, journalism career, I get more pleasure out of photography than anything. So to be able, kind of late summer, to go to whether it was Mitchell Field or out here in Suffolk at some of the ballparks out here, and photograph the players, or even in Jersey a few times. I know I was at Yogi Berra Stadium at Montclair State. To be able to go to those facilities and shoot our players was just very, very fun for me, and help pass the time during the summer.
I got to ask one last question for those viewers that are from and since our footprint tends to be New York and Long Island, not tends to be, but is New York and Long Island. I got to ask you one last question as a journalist. Thoughts? Wilpons, Cohen, what's going on?
Oh boy, you're gonna get me in trouble. You know what? Everyone presumes, just like they presume that I have a bad relationship with Omar Minaya, which is the furthest thing from the truth. Everyone presumes. It's funny. I tweeted best wishes to Jeff Wilpon when the sale went through on Twitter, and everyone thought, "Oh, that's a great tweet. You're being so sarcastic. That's a great." And I was actually being sincere. I mean, obviously, when you cover someone intensely for 15 years, when you cover the Madoff affair and things like that, you're going to have your share of disagreements. But Jeff and I actually always got along really well. I shouldn't say always. Like 95% of the time, got along really, really, really well. and I thoroughly enjoyed. Well, I shouldn't say thoroughly enjoyed, but we had a very good working relationship. I still talk to him to this day. I called him up and wished him best wishes as well when the sale went through, and I don't think anyone's shedding any tears for him. The family probably walked away with a couple $1 billion and still owns SNY, still owns a vibrant real estate development company. I think they're working on the Islanders projects, things like that. And so I don't think anyone's crying for Jeff Wilpon or anything like that. And but as I said, I feel good for Mets fans because obviously the Wilpons didn't have the deepest pockets in the world, which is probably an understatement. But I remember when Paul DePodesta got hired, he called it Moneyball with money, which was not quite obviously the case. It didn't bear out that way. But obviously Steve Cohen's enthusiasm is something that is great for the fans to see, and everyone's expecting the team to go out and spend big. I will caution if I were giving Steve Cohen one piece of advice. I mentioned I was watching shows on Netflix and things like that. If you watch what's the show? Something Till I Die is about one of the former Premier League teams. I can't remember which team it is now, but it's Sunderland. If you watch season 2 of that after the new owner takes over, and he makes all these promises, and I think they're still in the 3rd division to this day. I would caution Steve Cohen I would recommend if you were watching one thing, maybe watch that season of Sunderland Till I Die, because obviously they were pretty boastful and they almost delivered. They came within a goal in overtime or something like that of not getting or getting promoted to the next division. But talking a good game is, and I know he's sincere, but it's there's a lot of people who are very, very smart with 29 other teams too. So no matter how good your intentions are and how big your wallet is, it doesn't necessarily buy a championship. So I hope he's cautious and doesn't raise the bar too much, because if you raise you're always judging against your expectations, I should say. So just this is the caution tale there.
I would say that there's probably no better way to end this show for at least the baseball fans that are watching than something controversial from Adam Rubin to the Mets fans.
I don't know if that was. I don't know. But you know what? I will say this with the Mets over the years. Like, people always would ask me for predictions. If you take the under with the Mets, you usually get borne out right. So as I said, I covered 2 collapses followed by 6 straight losing seasons. So I'm maybe inclined to be a little more pessimistic, but I'm happy for Met fans. I know they're going to invest in the team. I know Sandy Alderson's a really bright guy, and I'm interested to see what he does now with a budget to work with, how cautious he is, because he's a cautious guy. He's not going to just throw around $500 million for a contract because they have it. So I'll be interested to see what if it is Moneyball with money, what it actually turns out to be. And I wish everyone there the best, because I still have a lot of friends. David Newman just got rehired as the head of marketing and communications there. He's actually a good friend of mine. He lived in the same building with me when I lived in Long Beach, and I wish him the best. I'm glad he's back with the organization. So I have a lot of friends there still. I still know players on the team who I'm very fond of. So I mentioned how nice David Wright is. Guys like Brandon Nimmo are off the charts nice as well. So I certainly wish those guys well, and I'm sure they will succeed to a certain level. I just what I meant was that getting a World Series is a little harder said than done, and no matter how much you talk, it's there's 29 other teams with very, very, very bright guys and some deep pockets also.
Well, Adam, certainly for the last almost hour 40, we certainly can't thank you enough for coming on and really divulging all of your experiences between your time in college to where you are now. We truly appreciate it.
My pleasure. I just heard, I don't know if you can hear my I guess my computer was beaping with text messages. So I hope I didn't say something too controversial, but I hope you didn't hear it either. But and my phone just started to explode. So hopefully I'm not getting too much hate text right now.
Well, Adam, just hang on for 1 second. So before we close tonight's show, we certainly want to let everyone know what's happening on the Eastern Observer this week. Well, the fun continues tomorrow night when the Essential Wrestling Podcast kicks off at 6 p.m. That's tomorrow night, November 17th. On Thursday, November 19th, we welcome former New York Islanders and Chicago Blackhawks goaltender J.F. Berube to the interview series starting at 8 p.m. And then this Friday, I'll be in the host chair and joined by my partner, Rob DeLuca, to get you caught up on all of the hot topics in sports on the Primetime Rundown beginning at 6 o'clock. And finally, the EWP crew wraps up the week by getting you ready for Survivor Series. That's this Sunday with a special airing of the Essential Wrestling Podcast beginning at 3 p.m. on Saturday. It all begins tomorrow night right here on the Eastern Observer and I-95 Sports Network, Zingo Channel 198. You won't want to miss it. And then on Monday, November 30th, please join me for episode number 46 of the Primetime Rundown interview series, powered by StreamYard. As the Assistant Director of Athletic Communications at St. John's University, Victoria Lanza joins me on the show. We'll be sure to touch upon her start in the collegiate athletics industry as a student at Ole Miss and her eventual landing at St. John's with a stint in television production in between. That's Monday, November 30th at 8 p.m. One last time, ladies and gentlemen, for my guest, the Associate Athletic Director for Strategic Communications at Stony Brook University, I'm Ian Schraier. Have a good night, everybody.